I expected the usual family theater of cranberry sauce and passive-aggressive questions, but then my grandmother stood up and screamed an accusation that silenced the room. Frozen. I stammered that I had no idea what she was talking about. The terrifying part was that I was telling the truth. That single honest admission turned our holiday dinner into the most perfect trap my family had ever set for themselves. My name is Hannah Blake, and as I turned my beat-up sedan onto the winding driveway of my parents' estate in Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that I'd come to associate with family gatherings. It was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating, like breathing underwater. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, not just sleepy, but deeply, structurally exhausted. I was 28 years old, but I felt ancient. Beside me on the passenger seat lay my phone. Screen dark, hiding the email I had received just 2 hours ago. It was a rejection letter from a landlord for a studio apartment on the wrong side of town. The reason was highlighted in a humiliating red font. Credit score insufficient, 540. That number was a shackle I dragged around my ankle every single day. I had 6 figures of student debt, a degree I was told would be my golden ticket, and a bank account that currently held less than $40. I parked the car behind my sister's gleaming SUV. The contrast was almost comical. My car had a rusted fender and a muffler that rattled like a bag of bolts. Hers was pristine, polished, and probably cost more than everything I would earn in the next 5 years. I took a deep breath, plastered on a smile that did not reach my eyes, and stepped out into the crisp November air. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling colonial revival that my parents, Mark and Denise, kept manicured to an obsessive degree. To the outside world, the Blakes were the picture of American success. To me, this house was a museum where I was the only exhibit that didn't fit. Inside, the air smelled of roasting turkey, sage, and expensive perfume. My mother, Denise, met me at the door. She did not hug me. She offered her cheek, a gesture that ensured her makeup remained undisturbed. "You're late, Hannah," she said, her voice light but sharp. "We were worried. Lauren and Ethan have been here for an hour." Traffic was bad on the interstate. I lied. I had actually been sitting in a parking lot for 30 minutes, crying over the apartment rejection, trying to compose myself enough to face them. "Well, you're here now." My father, Mark, boomed from the living room. He held a glass of scotch, looking every bit the successful patriarch. "Go say hello to your grandmother. She is in the sitting room. Try not to upset her. She is still adjusting to the time zone." Grandmother Evelyn Harrow. She had just returned to the States after 7 years of philanthropic work in Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe. I hadn't seen her since I was 21. I walked into the sitting room, expecting the frail old woman I remembered. Instead, I found a statue carved from granite. Evelyn sat in a high-backed wing chair, her posture rigid, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was wearing a dark wool suit that looked tailored and expensive. Her eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto me immediately. "Hannah," she said. It wasn't a question. It was an assessment. "Hi, Grandma," I said, feeling suddenly like a clumsy teenager. "Welcome home." She didn't smile. She gestured for me to come closer, her gaze sweeping over my scuffed boots and the sweater I had bought at a thrift store. "You look thin," she observed, her voice dry. "And tired. Is this what independence looks like?" "I'm working hard," I said defensively. "Working hard," she repeated, tasting the words as if they were sour. "We shall see." Dinner was the usual theater. We sat at the long mahogany table, the good china laid out like weapons of war. My sister, Lauren Pierce, sat across from me, radiating the glow of the well-fed and well-loved. She was 30, married to Ethan, a man with a firm handshake and a trust fund, and they were the darlings of Cedar Hollow. Lauren spent the first 20 minutes talking about their recent trip to Napa Valley, the renovations on their already perfect kitchen, and the charity gala she was organizing. I sat there, cutting my turkey into tiny pieces, trying to make myself invisible. Every time the conversation lulled, I felt the collective gaze of my parents drift to me, heavy with disappointment. They didn't ask about my job because they didn't want to know. They didn't ask about my life because they preferred to pretend I was just going through a phase of incompetence. "So," my father said, pouring more wine, "it is good to have the whole family together. Evelyn, are you enjoying the meal?" The table went quiet. We all looked at the matriarch. Evelyn had barely touched her food. She was staring at a spot in the center of the table, her expression unreadable. Then, she slowly lifted her head and looked directly at me. "I have a question," Evelyn said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a terrifying authority that cut through the ambient noise of the room. "Of course, Mother," Denise said nervously. "Anything." Evelyn ignored her. She kept her eyes on me. "Hannah, I went for a drive yesterday, to the property on Lake Silverwater, the cottage." I blinked, confused. "Okay?" "I was surprised," Evelyn continued, her tempo deliberate, "to find that the locks had been changed, and even more surprised to see a strange elderly couple living there. They were gardening in the front yard, a man and a woman, perhaps in their 60s. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I looked at my grandmother, genuinely perplexed. "I don't know who that would be. Grandma? Maybe neighbors?" Evelyn leaned forward. "They were not neighbors. Hannah, they were living inside the house that I bought for you." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of my lungs. I stared at her, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. "What?" "The Lake Silverwater property," Evelyn said, enunciating every syllable. "I purchased it under a trust in your name 8 years ago. It was meant to be your safety net, your start in life. I specifically left instructions that the deed was to be transferred to your full control upon your graduation from college." My brain scrambled to process the information. A house? A lake house? I remembered the cottage. We used to go there when I was a child. It was beautiful, valuable real estate. And she was saying it was mine? "Grandma," I stammered, my voice trembling. I have no idea about it. I didn't know I owned a house." Crash. Everyone jumped. Across the table, Lauren had knocked over her wine glass. The deep red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. Lauren's hand was shaking violently as she reached for a napkin. "Oh, clumsy me," Lauren said, her voice shrill, breathless. My hand slipped." "Mother," my father Mark said, his voice unusually loud. He stood up halfway, forcing a laugh that sounded like choking. "You are confused. The jet lag must be terrible. You have been gone a long time. Memory gets fuzzy." "Sit down, Mark," Evelyn said. She didn't even look at him. "Mom, really?" Denise added, her eyes darting between Evelyn and Lauren. "We can discuss business later. This is Thanksgiving. Let's not bore everyone with real estate talk that clearly—" "I am not bored," Evelyn interrupted. She reached into the leather tote bag she had placed by her feet. "And I am certainly not confused." She pulled out a photograph and slapped it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and came to rest right in front of my plate. I looked down. It was a high-quality print, likely taken from a social media post. It showed the front porch of the Lake Silverwater cottage. Standing there, arms linked and smiling brilliantly, were Lauren and Ethan. Flanking them was an older couple I didn't recognize. The strangers Evelyn had seen. They looked happy, proprietorial, like they belonged there. My blood ran cold. I knew this photo. "I have seen this," I whispered. My mind raced back 3 years. I was living in a basement apartment that flooded every time it rained. I was working 2 jobs, eating instant noodles, and crying myself to sleep because I couldn't afford to fix the brakes on my car. I was scrolling through Instagram on a break, and I saw Lauren post a photo dump titled, "Family Getaway." I assumed they had rented a place. I assumed it was just another luxury I couldn't afford. I looked up at Lauren. She wasn't wiping up the wine anymore. She was staring at the tablecloth, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin white line. Ethan was looking at the ceiling, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "That is the couple," Evelyn said. pointing a manicured finger at the older people in the photo. Who are they? And why are they in Hannah's house? It's not Hannah's house, Lauren blurted out. The sudden volume of her voice made us all flinch. She looked up, her eyes wide and frantic. I mean, it's complicated. Grandma, you don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me, Evelyn said. It's Ethan's parents, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. That's who they are, isn't it? That's Ethan's parents. Lauren didn't answer, which was answer enough. I looked at my parents. I expected shock. I expected confusion. But on Mark and Denise's faces, I saw only panic and calculation. They weren't surprised. They were terrified of being caught. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. Now, Hannah, my mother started, her voice taking on that soothing, manipulative tone she used when she wanted me to agree to something unreasonable. You were going through a very unstable time 3 years ago. You were struggling. We didn't want to burden you with property taxes and maintenance. We thought it was best to manage it for you until you were ready. Manage it? I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. You put Lauren's in-laws in my house while I was selling my plasma to pay for textbooks? It is just a house, Hannah, Mark snapped, slamming his hand on the table. Don't be dramatic. We did what was best for the family. Ethan's parents needed a place, and the house was sitting empty. You were in no position to take care of it. Look at you. You can barely take care of yourself. The insult landed, but this time, it didn't make me shrink. It fueled a fire that had been smoldering in my gut for years. All the times they told me I was bad with money. All the times they told me I wasn't responsible enough. All the times I begged for a loan to cover rent, and they gave me a lecture on frugality instead. They weren't teaching me a lesson. They were stealing from me. I looked at the photo again, the happy smiles, the comfort, the security. Everything I had been clawing for, everything I had been denied, was right there in that picture, being handed to someone else on a silver platter. I looked at my grandmother. Her face was impassive, but her eyes were burning with a fierce, cold intelligence. She wasn't stopping me. She was waiting for me. I turned to my father, my voice shaking not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt like clarity. You let me believe I was a failure, I said, my voice rising. You watched me drown in debt. You watched me get rejected for an apartment today, because my credit is ruined, and all this time, I owned a lake house? We were protecting you, Denise cried out, clutching her pearls. You are unstable. Hannah, you make rash decisions. If there is something called my future, I said, leaning over the table, staring directly into my father's evasive eyes, and if you claim to care about me, then answer me this. Why am I living like a homeless person while strangers are living in my inheritance? The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't awkward. It was dangerous. The air crackled with the electricity of a storm that had finally, inevitably, broken. And at the head of the table, Evelyn Harrow slowly picked up her wine glass, took a sip, and smiled a smile that didn't have an ounce of warmth in it. Let us not ruin the holiday, my father said, his voice dropping into that deep, reasonable baritone he used to charm juries and country club boards. He placed his napkin on the table, smoothing out the wrinkles with a deliberate, rhythmic motion. We can discuss the particulars of the trust and the property management next week. Tonight is for gratitude. Tonight is for family. He reached for the wine bottle to refill my grandmother's glass, acting as if the previous 5 minutes had not happened, as if I had not just accused them of theft. It was a masterclass in dismissal. He was trying to sweep the shattered glass under the rug, while we were all still standing barefoot on it. No, Evelyn said. She did not raise her voice. She did not slam her hand on the table. She simply placed her hand over her wine glass, blocking my father's pour. We will not discuss this next week, she continued, her eyes locked on his. We will discuss this right now. The turkey is getting cold. Mark, but my patience froze over the moment I saw strangers living in my granddaughter's home. Mom, please, Denise hissed, leaning forward, her bracelets jangling, a cheerful sound that clashed with the venom in her eyes. You are jet-lagged. You are making a scene. Hannah is clearly confused, and we do not need to air dirty laundry. I am not confused, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I hated that shake. It was the physical manifestation of 20 years of conditioning. I know what I saw in that photo, and I know I have never signed a lease for anyone. My mother turned to me, her face softening into a mask of pity that was far more cutting than her anger. She tilted her head, giving me the look one gives a frightened, irrational child. Hannah, honey, she crooned. Look at you. You are trembling. You are flushed. You are getting worked up again. Just like last Christmas. Remember what the doctor said about your stress levels? You are creating a narrative in your head because you are feeling overwhelmed by your life choices. She turned back to Evelyn, pointing a manicured hand at me as if presenting evidence. See, Mother? This is what we deal with. She is hysterical. She gets an idea in her head, and she spirals. It is why we had to step in. We could not burden her with the responsibility of a property when she can barely handle her own rent. The gaslighting was so practiced, so seamless, that for a split second, I actually doubted myself. Did I misunderstand? Was I crazy? My heart hammered against my ribs. This was their greatest weapon. They didn't just hurt you. They made you believe you hurt yourself. I am not hysterical, I said, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. I am angry. There is a difference. Is there? Denise asked, raising an eyebrow. Because from where I am sitting, you look unstable. You storm in here late, looking disheveled. And now you are accusing your sister who has done nothing but support you, of stealing. Support me? I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. Lauren hasn't called me in 6 months unless she needed a ride from the airport. That is enough, Mark barked. He looked at Evelyn, his expression shifting to one of sorrowful duty. Mother, I didn't want to tell you this. We wanted to protect Hannah's reputation in your eyes. But since you are forcing the issue, the truth is that Hannah was deemed unfit. The word hung in the air like smoke, unfit. Evelyn didn't blink. She sat perfectly still, her spine not touching the back of her chair. Define unfit, she said. Financially incompetent, Mark said smoothly, gaining confidence now that he had a lie to stand on. After college, Hannah went through a very dark period. Reckless spending, inability to hold down a job. There were incidents. We were advised that giving her control of a significant asset like the Silverwater cottage would be dangerous. She would have sold it for pennies, or lost it to creditors within a month. We stepped in as custodians. We are simply holding the property until she proves she is capable. I stared at him, my mouth agape. The audacity was breathtaking. That is a lie, I said, my voice gaining strength. That is a complete fabrication. I have a 4.0 GPA. I graduated with honors. I have never been fired from a job in my life. The only reason I have debt is because you told me you couldn't help with tuition. So I took out loans. The only reason I have bad credit is because... I stopped. I didn't know why my credit was so bad. I paid my bills. I ate ramen noodles. I walked to work to save gas. Because you make poor decisions, Denise finished for me. You always have. Hannah, you are a dreamer. You are soft. You let people take advantage of you. We are the only ones who stop you from ruining yourself. Is that what you told me in your letters? Mark? Evelyn asked. Her voice was conversational, almost light. You wrote to me every month while I was in Cambodia. You told me Hannah was struggling with mental health issues. You told me she was in and out of therapy, that she could not be trusted with money, that she asked you to take over the burden of the house. I never asked that, I screamed. The sound ripped out of my throat before I could stop it. I didn't even know the house existed. How could I ask you to take it over? She is shouting, Lauren whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. She took a sip of her wine, her hand steady now. She is having one of her episodes. I am shouting because you are lying about my life. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I work 60 hours a week. I manage a design team, a small one, but I manage it. I have never missed a rent payment, even when I had to skip meals. You made me think I was failing. You made me think I was the black sheep because I wasn't rich like you. But I wasn't failing. I was just starting from zero while you were stealing my inheritance to boost your portfolio. I looked at Lauren, my beautiful golden sister, the one who got the private tutors, the new cars, the down payment for her first condo. And you, I said, pointing at her, you let me drive that rusted piece of junk car to your wedding. You let me buy you a wedding gift I couldn't afford on a credit card I'm still paying off. And all that time, you were collecting rent from your in-laws living in my house? How do you sleep at night? Lauren slammed her glass down. The stem snapped, but she didn't care. Her face, usually a mask of influencer-perfect composure, twisted into something ugly and raw. Because I deserve it, Orange shrieked. The room went dead silent. Even Mark looked shocked by her outburst. Lauren stood up, shaking, her eyes wild. Look at you. Hannah, look at your clothes. Look at your hair. You are a mess. You have always been a mess. You don't know how to talk to people. You don't know how to network. You are awkward and depressing and ordinary. She gestured around the room, encompassing the crystal chandelier, the heavy curtains, the trappings of wealth. This world? It requires maintenance, Lauren spat. It requires image. Ethan and I are building a future. We are expanding the family name. We have connections. We host events. We use that house to network with partners who matter. What would you do with a lake house? Hannah? Sit there and read books? Fill it with stray cats? You have nothing that makes you worthy of an estate like that. Nothing. The cruelty of it was so naked, so honest, that it almost didn't hurt. It was clarifying. For my entire life, I thought I was the problem. I thought if I just worked harder, if I was just smarter, prettier, more charming, I would finally be accepted. I thought my parents were tough on me because they wanted me to be better. But that wasn't it. They didn't think I was flawed. They thought I was irrelevant. They viewed me as a non-entity, a placeholder, a resource to be harvested to feed the success of the real child, the golden child. They didn't take the house because they were worried about my finances. They took it because they truly believed I didn't matter enough to own it. To them, I was just an obstacle to their entitlement. So it is not about my mental health, I said quietly, and it is not about my financial competence. It is about the fact that you think you are better than me. We are better at being a family, Denise said cold, her mask slipping entirely. We protect our own. You have always been outside, difficult. If you loved us, you would understand that the house serves a greater purpose with Lauren than it ever would with you. There it is, I said. The definition of family. You take what is mine, and if I complain, I am the traitor. I looked at Evelyn. She had not moved during the entire exchange. She sat like a judge on a high bench, her eyes moving from Mark's sweating forehead to Denise's defiant chin, and finally resting on Lauren's heaving chest. She looked at them not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a particularly aggressive strain of bacteria. Then, she looked at me. For the first time tonight, her eyes weren't hard. They were just sad, but it was a fleeting emotion, gone in a heartbeat, replaced by steel. So, Evelyn said, breaking the silence. Mark claimed Hannah was mentally incompetent. Denise claims Hannah is emotionally unstable. And Lauren claims Hannah is socially unworthy. That is the defense? It is the truth, Mother, Mark said, loosening his tie. We can show you the records. We have documentation. We can explain everything in the morning when emotions are not so high. Documentation, Evelyn repeated. I like documentation. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was an old model, simple, but she handled it with purpose. She pressed a single button, held it to her ear, and stared directly at my father. Come in, she said into the phone. Her voice was low, devoid of any holiday warmth. Bring all the files. She hung up and placed the phone on the table next to the photo of Lauren in the house. "Files?" Mark asked, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Who are you calling? The police?" "Better," Evelyn said. "Or worse, depending on which side of the table you are sitting on." The front door opened. The heavy oak door groaned on its hinges, sending a draft of cold air rushing down the hallway and into the dining room. The candles on the table flickered. My parents turned around in their chairs. Lauren wiped a tear from her cheek, looking confused. I just sat there, my heart pounding in my throat, watching my grandmother. She wasn't the confused old woman returning from charity work. She wasn't the distant matriarch. She was the woman who had built the Harrow fortune from nothing before my father married into it, and she had clearly come home for a reckoning. Footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor, heavy, deliberate, expensive shoes striking the ground with the rhythm of an executioner's drum. The dinner was over. The trial was about to begin. The man who stepped into the dining room did not look like a dinner guest. He looked like a surgical instrument wrapped in a three-piece suit. He was tall, with graying temples and eyes that seemed to have been trained to read fine print in the dark. He carried a thick leather briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other, and his presence instantly sucked the oxygen out of the room. My father, Mark, stood up so abruptly that his chair tipped backward. Though he managed to catch it before it hit the floor, his face had drained of color, leaving behind a sheen of cold sweat. "Who the hell is this?" Mark demanded, though the tremor in his voice betrayed that he already suspected the answer. "Mother, this is a private family gathering. You cannot just invite strangers into my home without consulting me." "It is not your home, Mark," Evelyn said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It is the bank's home, and until 30 days ago, I was under the impression that you were paying the mortgage. But Mr. Price here tells me a different story about liens and missed payments. However, that is a discussion for another hour." She gestured to the man. "This is Nolan Price. He is my attorney, and he is not here to eat turkey." Nolan Price did not smile. He did not offer a handshake. He walked to the end of the table, cleared away a centerpiece of pumpkins and candles with a dismissive sweep of his arm, and set his briefcase down with a heavy thud. The sound echoed like a gavel strike. "Good evening," Nolan said. His voice was dry, professional, and terrifyingly calm. "I apologize for the interruption, but my client insisted that time was of the essence." "Client?" Denise squeaked. She was gripping her wineglass with both hands now, looking from Evelyn to Nolan like a trapped animal. "Mom, you sued us?" "I am investigating," Evelyn corrected. "There is a difference, but depending on what happens in the next 10 minutes, one might lead to the other." She turned to the lawyer. "Nolan, show them the deed." Nolan opened the briefcase. The click of the latches sounded loud in the silent room. He pulled out a stack of documents, organized with color-coded tabs, and slid a single sheet of paper toward the center of the table. "This," Nolan said, tapping the paper with a gold pen, "is the transfer of deed for the property located at 112 Lakeview Drive, formerly known as the Harrow Cottage, now registered as Silverwater Cottage." I leaned forward, my heart pounding against my ribs. I saw legal jargon, stamps, and official seals, but my eyes went straight to the names. Grantor, Hannah Marie Blake. Grantee, Lauren Elizabeth Pierce. The property was purchased by the Evelyn Harrow Trust in 2018, with Hannah Blake named as the sole beneficiary upon her graduation from university. Nolan recited from memory, not even looking at the paper. However, on June 15, 2021, the title was transferred from Hannah Blake to Lauren Pierce for the sum of $1 and other valuable considerations. June 15, 2021. The date hit me like a physical slap. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I was back there. That summer. The summer I thought I was going insane. I had just graduated. I was supposed to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt like the world was collapsing around me. I remembered checking my bank account and seeing it overdrawn. I remembered the acceptance letter for a junior designer position in Chicago that I had been waiting for. It never came. I found out months later that they had rescinded the offer because I failed to respond to an email I never received. I remembered the crushing weight of panic. I was sleeping on a friend's couch because my lease application for a studio apartment had been denied at the last minute. The landlord had told me there was a discrepancy in my background check, but wouldn't elaborate. I had called my mother that week, crying, begging for advice. "You're just not ready for the real world. Hannah." Denise had told me over the phone, her voice dripping with disappointed sympathy. "You're overwhelmed. Maybe you should just stay low. Take a simple job, and let us handle the big things. Don't worry about paperwork. We'll sort out your student loans and your files. Just sign the authorization form so Dad can talk to the bank for you." I had signed a stack of papers my father brought to me at a coffee shop. He told me they were for deferring my student loans and consolidating my debt. I didn't read them. I was 22, exhausted, hungry, and I trusted my father. "I didn't sign a deed," I whispered. The realization made me nauseous. "I signed loan deferment papers. That's what you told me they were." "She is lying," Lauren screamed. My sister jumped to her feet, her face twisted in ugly desperation. "She is lying. She knew. She couldn't afford the taxes. She was broke. She came to us crying because she didn't want the responsibility. She begged me to take it." Lauren looked at Ethan, grabbing his arm. "Tell them, Ethan, tell them she wanted to get rid of it." Ethan pulled his arm away, his face pale. He was looking at the document on the table, and then at Nolan Price. Ethan was a banker. He knew exactly what that document represented. And more importantly, he knew what Nolan Price represented. "Lauren," Ethan said quietly, "sit down." "No," Lauren shouted. "I have the paper. It is a gift deed. She signed it. It is legal." Nolan Price looked at Lauren with an expression of mild boredom. "A signature on a piece of paper is a start, Mrs. Pierce, but context is everything, and intent is the rest." He tapped the tablet in his other hand, waking the screen. "We have the physical document," Nolan said, "but papers can be manufactured. What is harder to manufacture is the digital footprint surrounding the transaction." He looked at me. "Ms. Blake, during the week of June 15th, 2021, did you have access to your primary email account?" I frowned, trying to remember. "No, I got locked out. Google said there was suspicious activity. I couldn't get back in for 10 days. By the time I did, the job offer in Chicago was expired." "Suspicious activity," Nolan repeated. He swiped on the tablet. "Interestingly, the recovery email for your account was changed 3 hours before you were locked out. It was changed to an address hosted on a private server, the same server that hosts the email for the law firm of Mark Blake and Associates." My father made a choking sound. "That is privileged information. You cannot hack my firm's server." "I didn't hack anything," Nolan said calmly. "I simply looked at the metadata on the transfer confirmation sent to the county clerk. It was sent from your IP address, Mark, at 2 o'clock in the morning, on a night when Hannah was, according to her credit card receipts, sleeping on a couch in Philadelphia, 60 miles away." The room went deadly silent. The pieces were clicking together in my mind, forming a picture so grotesque I wanted to look away. But I couldn't. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the money. "The job in Chicago," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and grief. "I didn't miss the email. You deleted it." I looked at my mother. "You told me I wasn't good enough. You told me I didn't get the job because my portfolio was weak. But you knew. You knew I got the offer, and you deleted it so I would stay desperate, so I would stay poor enough to need you." Denise refused to meet my eyes. She was picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth, her lips moving silently as if rehearsing a defense. "And the apartment," I continued, the memories flooding back, sharp and clear. "The landlord said there was a discrepancy. It wasn't a mistake, was it? You messed with my background check." "We needed to keep you close," Mark said. His voice was hoarse. He wasn't denying it anymore. He was trying to justify it. "You were going to move to Chicago. You would have taken the trust assets with you. The family capital needs to remain consolidated. Hannah, that is how wealth works. You don't splinter it off to every child who wants to play adventurer. Lauren stayed. Lauren contributed to the family. The house belongs to the family. I am the family, I shouted. No, Lauren spat, her eyes venomous. You are the expense. I am the investment. The cruelty of her words hung in the air. It was the naked truth of how they saw us. Asset versus liability. Evelyn stood up slowly. She walked around the table, the tapping of her cane the only sound in the room. She stopped behind my chair. I felt her hand rest on my shoulder. It was heavy, grounding. It wasn't a hug. It was an anchor. An investment, Evelyn repeated, testing the word. She looked at Lauren, then at Mark. You traded your daughter's future for a lake house and a sense of superiority. You crippled her career, sabotaged her housing, and stole her inheritance, all to maintain the illusion that you are successful people. She squeezed my shoulder. Her grip was surprisingly strong. But here's the problem with your calculation, Evelyn said softly. You assumed Hannah would never find out. You assumed she would stay the broken, confused girl you created. You assumed she would never have the resources to fight back. She looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of pride in her eyes. Not the warm, fuzzy pride of a grandmother baking cookies, but the fierce pride of a general watching a soldier survive the trenches. But she didn't need resources, Evelyn said. She just needed the truth. Evelyn turned back to Nolan. Mr. Price, did you find the other document? The one regarding the medical power of attorney? Nolan nodded. He pulled another sheet from the stack. Yes, dated August 2022. It grants Mark and Denise Blake full power of attorney over Hannah Blake's medical and financial decisions in the event of incapacitation. I am not incapacitated, I said, horrified. No, Nolan said. But according to a letter in this file, drafted by a Dr. Aris Thorne, a psychiatrist who happens to be Mark's golf partner, you were being evaluated for borderline personality disorder with delusions of grandeur. The diagnosis was never filed officially, but the threat of it was prepared, ready to be used if you ever tried to claim the house. My blood ran cold. They had a contingency plan to have me committed. If I had ever found the deed on my own, if I had ever tried to fight them without Evelyn, they would have used this. They would have labeled me insane to protect their theft. If you didn't know about this, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room, it means they were not just stealing from you, Hannah. They were preparing to bury you. She looked at Mark, her own son, with eyes that were absolute zero. You built a cage for her, Evelyn said, and you kept the key in your pocket, but you forgot one thing. Mark, you forgot that she is my granddaughter too. And in this family, we do not tolerate traitors. Nolan tapped the tablet again. Shall we proceed to the forensic accounting, Mrs. Harrow? Or should we let them digest the felony fraud charges first? Let's do the accounting, Evelyn said, sitting back down and smoothing her napkin on her lap. I want to know exactly how much rent the Quinns have been paying to my granddaughter's imposter. The silence in the dining room was no longer the silence of shock. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a crime scene where the body had just been uncovered. Nolan Price did not give my family time to recover from the revelation of the medical power of attorney. He swiped his finger across the tablet screen, bringing up a new interface. Let us talk about your career, Hannah, Nolan said. I looked up, confused. My career? I don't have one. That is the point. I have been freelancing for scraps for 3 years. Precisely, Nolan said. You graduated with honors. You had a strong portfolio. You applied to over 30 mid-level design firms in the tri-state area between 2021 and 2023. And yet, you received 0 callbacks after the initial screening rounds. Did you never find that statistically improbable? I thought I wasn't good enough, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I thought the market was tough. The market is tough, Nolan agreed, but it is not that tough. He turned the tablet around so the screen faced the table. Displayed on it was a chain of emails. The subject lines were all variations of the same urgent warning. Confidential reference regarding candidate Hannah Blake. These emails, Nolan explained, his voice clinical, were sent to the HR departments of every major firm you applied to. They were sent typically 2 days after you submitted your application. They claimed to be from a concerned former employer or a senior industry advisor who wished to remain anonymous for legal reasons. I leaned in, squinting at the text. The words blurred through the tears stinging my eyes, but I forced myself to read them. Candidate demonstrates high volatility. History of theft in the workplace. Unreliable under pressure. Struggles with reality. Do not hire. I couldn't breathe. I never stole anything. Who wrote this? The email address is untraceable to the public, Nolan said. However, the metadata tells a different story. These emails were not sent from a corporate server. They were sent from a residential IP address registered to Mark and Denise Blake. My father flinched as if he had been struck. Specifically, Nolan continued, looking at my father, they were sent between the hours of 9 in the morning and 11 in the morning on weekdays. That is the time you usually spend in your home office handling correspondence, is it not, Mark? I stared at my father. I remembered those mornings. I would be sitting at the kitchen table, frantically refreshing my inbox, praying for an interview request, while he was sitting just down the hall, systematically destroying my chances. You killed my career, I said. The realization was a physical pain in my chest. It wasn't that I lacked talent. It wasn't that I was unhireable. You were actively hunting down my opportunities and shooting them. We were protecting the narrative, Mark blurted out. He was sweating profusely now, the confident patriarch melting away to reveal a desperate, cornered man. If you got a high-paying job in the city, you would have moved away. You would have wanted your independence. You would have found out about the house sooner. We needed you to stay. Manageable. Manageable, I repeated. You needed me broken. We needed you here, Denise cried, her voice shrill. We are a family. We stay together. No, Evelyn interrupted. Her voice was like a whip crack. You needed her compliant, and to keep her compliant, you needed her poor. Nolan nodded to Evelyn and tapped the screen again. A spreadsheet appeared this time, filled with rows of numbers and dates. Which brings us to the money, Nolan said. Hannah, for the past 3 years, you have been transferring $450 a month to your mother. This was supposed to be for your consolidated student loan payments, correct? Yes, I said. Mom said she bundled my loans with a family consolidation plan to get a lower interest rate. I sent her the money. She pays the servicer. That was the lie, Nolan said. There is no family consolidation plan. Your loans are still individual. And the money you sent? He pointed to a column highlighted in red. Every month, on the 1st, you transferred $450 to Denise's primary checking account, and every month, on the 2nd, that money was automatically transferred to a secondary savings account labeled Vacation Fund. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? Your student loans were not paid on the 1st, Nolan said. They were paid sporadically, sometimes 3 weeks late, sometimes a month late, sometimes only the minimum interest was paid, and the rest of your money remained in your mother's account. This erratic payment history is the sole reason your credit score is 540. It is not because you are irresponsible, Hannah. It is because your mother was embezzling your loan payments. I looked at Denise, my mother, the woman who had held my hand when I cried about my credit score being too low to rent an apartment, the woman who told me, "Oh, honey, maybe you just aren't good with deadlines." It was a system error, Denise stammered, her hands shaking as she reached for her water glass. Water sloshed over the rim. The banking app, it is confusing. I must have set up the auto-pay wrong. I never meant to keep it. It was just sitting there. I would have paid it back. A system error? Nolan asked, raising an eyebrow. Mrs. Blake, I have the bank logs. This transfer was set up manually 3 years ago. It was titled Sweep to Savings, and you accessed that savings account 6 times last year to pay for spa treatments and a deposit on a new leasing vehicle for Lauren. The room spun. My money, the money I made scrubbing toilets and designing logos for pennies, the money I starved myself to save, they used it to pay for Lauren's car? You ruined my name, I said, my voice trembling. You didn't just take my money. You destroyed my credit. You made it impossible for me to rent a home. You made it impossible for me to get a car loan. You trapped me. It is not a trap, Lauren sneered. She was leaning back in her chair now, her arms crossed, looking at me with pure disdain. It is reality. Hannah, you wouldn't have known how to handle good credit anyway. You are used to being poor. It is your baseline. Honestly, you are making a big deal out of nothing. We were going to fix it eventually. You are used to being poor. The sentence hung in the air, cold and jagged. That was the knife. That was the truth stripped of all the "we love you" padding. They didn't see my struggle as a tragedy. They saw it as my natural state. To them, I was designed to be the bottom feeder, the one who struggled so they could feel superior. My poverty wasn't a circumstance. It was my assigned role in the family play. I looked at Lauren, at her diamond earrings, at her designer dress, and then I looked at my own frayed sweater. I am used to being poor, I said slowly, because you have been standing on my neck for 3 years. Evelyn slammed her hand on the table. The sound was like a gunshot. Enough, she commanded. She stood up, leaning heavily on her cane, her small frame vibrating with a terrifying energy. She looked at Mark, then Denise, then Lauren. I want to know, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Who designed this? This was not an accident. This was not a drift. This was a complex, multi-year architectural demolition of a human being's life. Who drew the blueprints? Mark looked at the table. Denise looked at Mark. Lauren looked at the wall. Silence. No one spoke. The cowardice was palpable. They were happy to destroy me when I was blindfolded. But now that the lights were on, none of them had the courage to own the knife. And then, looking at my grandmother, a sudden realization hit me. It washed over me like ice water. Evelyn wasn't asking because she didn't know. She had the emails, she had the bank statements, she had the IP addresses, she had Nolan Price, a man who charged more per hour than I made in a month. She had been back in the country for weeks, not days. She wasn't investigating. She wasn't discovering the truth alongside me. She already knew. She knew everything, every dirty detail, every stolen dollar, every fake email. She had set this stage. She had gathered us all here. Let them lie. Let them dig their graves. And now she was forcing them to stand in them. She wasn't looking for answers. She was looking for a confession. She was giving them one last chance to show a shred of humanity, knowing full well they wouldn't take it. You knew, I whispered, looking at Evelyn. Evelyn didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on my father. I am waiting. Mark, was it you? Or did you let your wife convince you that cannibalizing your own daughter was good parenting? It was for the family, Mark yelled, finally snapping. You don't understand. Mother, the firm is in trouble. We leveraged everything. The house, the Silverwater property. It was the only asset with enough equity to secure the bridge loan we needed. If we didn't use it, we would have lost everything. This house, the cars, the status. So you sacrificed Hannah, Evelyn said. She didn't need it, Mark cried, tears of self-pity welling in his eyes. She is simple. She doesn't need much. We needed it to survive. And there it is, Evelyn said, her voice soft and final. The confession. She turned to Nolan. Enter that into the record, please. Admitted fraud for the purpose of securing a loan under false pretenses. Nolan tapped the screen. Recorded and saved. My father froze. He looked at the tablet, then at Evelyn. The realization that he had just confessed to a felony in front of a witness washed over him. You recorded that? Mark whispered. I told you, Evelyn said, sitting back down and smoothing her skirt. I am not here to eat turkey. I am here to clean house. And Mark, we are just getting started. Let us be precise about the nature of this survival you claim to be fighting for, Nolan Price said, his voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a scalpel. He did not look up from his tablet, but the air in the room seemed to bend around him. We have established that you committed fraud to secure a loan, but that was a one-time transaction. What I am more interested in is the recurring revenue stream. Nolan swiped the screen again, and a new image appeared on the tablet, which he then cast to a portable projector he had pulled from his briefcase. The image was projected onto the cream-colored wall of the dining room, large and undeniable. It was a dossier on two individuals. Paul and Marissa Quinn, Nolan announced. The parents of your son-in-law, Ethan. I looked at the projection. It was a standard background check summary, but seeing their faces, kindly, smiling, silver-haired, loomed large over the dinner table felt surreal. These were the people I had seen at Lauren's wedding. They had given me a polite, pitying smile when I told them I was working freelance. They are living in the Silverwater cottage, Nolan stated. We have established that, but the narrative you have spun, Lauren, is one of familial charity. Lauren shifted in her seat. She looked less like the golden child now and more like a cornered fox. Her eyes darted to Ethan, but he was staring fixedly at his water glass, his knuckles white as he gripped the stem. They are elderly, Lauren said, her voice trembling with a forced, righteous indignation. Ethan's father has a heart condition. They needed a quiet place, away from the city noise and the pollution. The cottage was sitting empty. It was rotting away. We did a good thing. We gave family a place to rest. Is that a crime now? Taking care of old people? She looked around the table, eyes pleading for validation. Honestly, you make it sound like we are running a drug cartel. We let his parents stay in an empty house. That is it. Is that it? Evelyn asked. She was leaning back in her chair, watching Lauren with a terrifying calmness. Yes, Lauren insisted. We are not charging them market rate or anything. We are just covering costs. They are on a fixed income. Nolan pressed a button on the tablet. The image on the wall changed. It was now a series of bank statements. Specifically, the monthly transaction logs for an account named L&E Holdings, LLC. L&E Holdings, Nolan read, registered to Lauren and Ethan Pierce. And here we have the incoming wire transfers, every single month, on the 5th, like clockwork. He pointed to the column of figures. $4,800, Nolan read aloud. I felt the air leave my lungs. $4,800, Nolan repeated, looking directly at me. That is the monthly transfer from Paul and Marissa Quinn to L&E Holdings. The memo line on every single transaction reads, Rent, Cottage. I stared at the number projected on the wall, $4,800. My brain tried to comprehend that sum. That was more than I made in 3 months of grueling freelance work. That was 10 times my grocery budget. That was a fortune. You are charging them nearly $5,000 a month? I whispered, the horror rising in my throat. It is a luxury waterfront property, Mark interjected quickly, trying to regain control of the narrative. The market value is actually closer to $6,000. They are getting a family discount. It is a very fair arrangement. A fair arrangement? I turned to my father, my vision blurring with rage. You told me the house was a burden. You told me it would bankrupt me with taxes and maintenance, but it is generating nearly $60,000 a year in passive income? Income that you would have squandered, Mark shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. You don't understand how these things work. Hannah, the taxes are high. The upkeep is expensive. That money goes right back into the house. Does it? Nolan asked. Because according to the expense reports for L&E Holdings, the only maintenance billed to the account in the last 12 months was for lawn care service at $150 a month. The rest of the money, over $50,000 this year alone, was transferred out. Nolan traced the line on the screen. Transferred to a personal account held by Lauren Pierce and used to pay for, among other things, a membership at the Cedar Hollow Country Club, a lease on a Range Rover, and a very expensive trip to Napa Valley. I looked at Lauren, She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet. I had admired it earlier. I realized now that I had paid for it, or rather, my house had paid for it. "You are living off my inheritance," I said, my voice shaking. "I am eating instant noodles. I am dodging calls from debt collectors. I am sleeping in my car when I'm between apartments. And you are using my house to pay for your country club membership?" "It's not your house," Lauren shrieked. "It's our house. It's family property. I am the one managing it. I am the one dealing with the tenants. I deserve a management fee." "A management fee of 100%?" Evelyn asked dryly. "The house is being taken care of," Mark insisted, slamming his hand on the table again. "Why are we arguing about this? Paul and Marissa are happy. They have a beautiful home. Lauren is being compensated for her time. The asset is preserved. Everyone is winning. What is the problem?" "The problem," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a register that made the hairs on my arms stand up, "is that the actual owner of the property is currently homeless." The word hung in the air. Homeless. It wasn't an exaggeration. I didn't have a lease. I didn't have a key to anywhere. All I had was the car outside and a box of clothes in the trunk. And suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind, a memory so sharp it felt like a physical stab. It was 6 months ago. I had called my mother. My car had broken down. The transmission. It was going to cost $1,200 to fix. I didn't have it. I couldn't get to work without the car. I was desperate. I called Denise, crying, swallowing my pride, begging for a loan, just a loan. I promised to pay it back with interest. I remembered Denise's voice perfectly. It was calm, disappointed, lecturing. "Hannah, we have talked about this," she had said. "We cannot keep bailing you out. It enables your bad habits. You need to learn to be independent. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. If we give you money, we are hurting you. Figure it out. It builds character." I looked at Denise now. She was staring at her plate, refusing to look at the projection on the wall. "You told me to be independent," I said, my voice breaking. "When I asked for help with the transmission, you gave me a lecture on self-reliance." Denise flinched. "You told me I needed to learn the value of $1, I continued, tears finally spilling over. "While you were sitting on a secret bank account filled with my money, while your daughter was collecting $5,000 a month from my house, you watched me walk to work in the rain because I couldn't afford to fix my car. And you told me it was building character?" We didn't want you to be spoiled," Denise whispered, her voice barely audible. "Spoiled?" I laughed, a hysterical sound that frightened even me. "I was hungry, Mom. I was literally hungry. I lost 10 pounds that winter because I was skipping dinner to save money for heat. And you were cashing rent checks from my house?" "It is complicated," Mark muttered. "It is theft," Nolan corrected. "Pure and simple, grand larceny, actually, given the amount." Lauren's face went white. The word larceny seemed to penetrate the bubble of delusion she had been living in. She looked at Ethan. "They can't arrest us," Lauren whispered to him. "It's family. You can't be arrested for family stuff." Ethan finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Lauren, shut up." "Excuse me?" Lauren looked at him, shocked. "Shut up," Ethan repeated, looking at Nolan. "Mr. Price, my parents, Paul and Marissa, do they know about the deed? Do they know Hannah is the owner?" "That is an interesting question," Nolan said. He tapped the screen again. "Because it brings us to the lease agreement." A document appeared on the wall. It was a rental contract. "This is the lease signed by Paul and Marissa Quinn," Nolan said. "Now, typically, a lease identifies the landlord and the tenant, but this document is unique." He zoomed in on the landlord section. It didn't say Lauren Pierce. It didn't say Hannah Blake. It listed the landlord as the Harrow Estate Trust, administered by L. Pierce. "They used the trust name," Nolan explained, "to give it an air of legitimacy. But here's the catch. Look at Clause 14. He scrolled down. The text was dense legalese. "Tenant agrees to maintain confidentiality regarding all rental payments and acknowledges that said payments are significantly below market value in exchange for custodial services and discretion regarding property ownership status. Discretion regarding property ownership status, Evelyn read aloud. She looked at Ethan. Why would a standard tenant need to sign a clause promising to keep their mouth shut about who owns the house? Ethan closed his eyes. He knew. Because they knew it wasn't Lauren's house. I realized. They knew. Paul and Marissa are not just tenants, Nolan said. They are accomplices. They signed a document acknowledging that the ownership status was sensitive and agreed to pay below market value. Though $4,800 is hardly cheap, it is indeed less than the $6,000 the house could command, in exchange for silence. They knew I owned it? I asked. They knew someone else owned it, Nolan clarified. And they knew that paying Lauren directly, rather than a trust account, was irregular. But they wanted the lake house. They wanted the view, and they got a deal. So they signed the paper that said, "Don't ask, don't tell." I looked at the photo of the happy couple again, Paul and Marissa, the nice old people who sent me a generic Christmas card every year. They weren't just innocent grandparents enjoying their retirement. They were beneficiaries of the scam. They were paying a bribe to live in a stolen house. So everyone knew, I said, my voice hollow. My parents, my sister, my brother-in-law, his parents, everyone knew I was the owner. Everyone was benefiting from it. Everyone was eating from the table set with my inheritance. Everyone except me. It appears so, Nolan said. Lauren stood up. She looked like she was about to vomit. My in-laws. If this comes out, Paul is a retired judge. This will ruin his reputation. You can't drag them into this. I didn't drag them in, Evelyn said coldly. They signed their names on the dotted line. They walked right in. Please, Lauren begged, tears streaming down her face now, real tears, terrified tears. Grandma, please, do not destroy Ethan's family. They are innocent people. Innocent people do not sign non-disclosure agreements to rent a vacation home. Evelyn snapped. She turned to Nolan. What is the total sum of rent collected over the last 3 years? Nolan did a quick calculation on the tablet. $172,800, plus interest. $172,000, Evelyn repeated. She looked at Mark. You said you needed money to save the firm. Did you see any of this money? Mark? Or did your golden daughter spend it all on herself? Mark looked at Lauren. The realization dawned on him. He had committed fraud to get the loan. Yes, but the monthly rent? The steady stream of cash? He hadn't seen a dime of that. Lauren and Ethan had kept it all. You told me the rent was just covering taxes, Mark whispered, staring at his daughter. You told me there was no profit. We had expenses, Lauren stammered. You stole from me too, Mark said, his voice rising in disbelief. We are in this together, risking jail time, and you were skimming the profit off the top? I deserve it, Lauren screamed, stomping her foot like a child. I had to deal with them. I had to visit the old people. I had to manage the property. You just sat in your office. I did the work. The work of cashing checks, I said. The absurdity of it struck me. They were turning on each other. The thieves were fighting over the loot while the victim was still sitting at the table. It stops now, Evelyn said. Nolan, draft the eviction notice. Already done, Nolan said. But there is also the matter of the criminal complaint, for Paul and Marissa Quinn, for conspiracy to commit fraud. No! Lauren shrieked. She lunged across the table, grabbing for the tablet. You can't. Ethan will leave me. You can't do this. Nolan pulled the tablet back effortlessly. Lauren lost her balance and collapsed onto the table. Knocking over the gravy boat, brown liquid pooled around her expensive dress, dripping onto the floor. She lay there, sobbing, a mess of diamonds and gravy and moral decay. Ethan is the least of your problems, Evelyn said. You should be worried about whether the prison jumpsuit will match your eyes. Lauren scrambled up from the table, her dress stained with brown gravy, her hair wild. She did not look at her husband, who was currently staring at the ceiling as if praying for an abduction by aliens. She grabbed her purse, which had fallen to the floor in the chaos, and ripped the zipper open. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped a lipstick and a set of keys before her fingers closed around what she was looking for. "I have proof!" she screamed, slamming a folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper onto the table, right on top of the mess she had made. "I knew you would try to twist this. I knew you would lie. So I brought the original. Look at it. It is right there." She pointed a trembling finger at the document. "Gift deed, signed by Hannah Blake, June 15th, 2021. You can't argue with ink. Hannah." I looked at the paper. It looked official. It had the right headers, the right font. And at the bottom, there was a signature that looked terrifyingly like mine. For a second, a wave of vertigo hit me. Had I signed it? Had I been so stressed, so tired back then that I just signed whatever they put in front of me? Nolan Price did not look impressed. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, high-powered magnifying loupe and a portable UV light. He didn't pick up the paper with his hands. He used a pair of tweezers to slide it onto a clean placemat. "Ink is interesting," Nolan said, his voice conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "But paper? Paper's a snitch." He flattened the document and leaned over it, peering through the loupe. Then, he took his tablet and switched the camera to a macro setting, hovering it inches above the page. The image on the wall projector changed. We were now looking at a microscopic view of the white space on the document. "Are you familiar with machine identification codes, Lauren?" Nolan asked. Lauren blinked, her chest heaving. "What?" "Printer steganography," Nolan explained. "Most color laser printers, specifically the high-end model you have in your home office, print a pattern of microscopic yellow dots on every single page. You can't see them with the naked eye, but under blue light and magnification, they are as clear as day." He tapped the screen. On the projection, a grid of faint yellow dots appeared in the white background of the paper. "These dots are a code," Nolan continued. "They tell us the serial number of the printer, but more importantly, they tell us the exact date and time the document was printed." He ran a quick algorithm on the tablet. A dialog box popped up on the screen with decoded text. "According to the header of this document, it was created and signed on June 15th, 2021, Nolan said. "However, according to the yellow dots embedded in the fiber of the paper itself, this page was printed on August 14th, 2025. The room went deadly silent. "August 14th, Nolan repeated. "That was 3 months ago. That was 2 days after Evelyn called Mark to say she was thinking about coming back to the States for a visit." I looked at the date on the screen. "August." "You printed it this year," I said, the realization washing over me. "You didn't have a deed. You never had a deed. You just took the house and hoped I would never ask. But when Grandma called, you panicked. You needed paper trails." Lauren's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "No, the printer clock must be wrong. We reset the Wi-Fi. It messed up the settings." "The printer clock relies on an atomic server connection," Nolan said dismissively. "It is not wrong, but let us pretend, for the sake of argument, that your printer traveled through time. Let us look at the signature." He moved the camera down to the bottom of the page, focusing on the signature. Hannah Blake. It looked like my handwriting, the loop of the H, the sharp K. It was convincing. "It is a good forgery," Nolan admitted. "Better than average. You clearly practiced. But you made a fundamental error. You traced it." "I did not," Lauren yelled. "She signed it right in front of me." "When a person signs their name naturally," Nolan said, zooming in until the ink strokes looked like rivers. "The pen moves fluidly. The pressure varies. There are microscopic trails where the ballpoint lifts and lands. But when someone traces a signature, or draws it slowly trying to mimic a shape, the line creates what we call hesitation marks." He pointed to the curve of the B. Under the magnification, the line wasn't smooth. It was jagged, made of tiny, Microscopic, jagged stops and starts. "See the tremor?" Nolan asked. "That is the hand of someone moving slowly, copying a shape, not writing a name. And look at the pressure point here on the final E." He swiped the screen, bringing up a split-screen comparison. On the left was the forged signature. On the right was a document Lauren had signed earlier, the lease agreement for her in-laws. "The terminal stroke," Nolan said. "The way the line flicks up at the very end. Hannah, your signature, which I have from your loan documents, ends with a downward chop. Lauren, however, ends her words with an upward flick, a flourish." He circled the end of the forged signature. It flicked up. "Muscle memory is a hard thing to break," Nolan said. "Even when you are pretending to be someone else, your hand remembers who it is. You wrote this, Lauren, and you did it recently." Lauren stood frozen. The evidence was projected on the wall. 5 feet tall, undeniable. The yellow dots, the hesitation marks, the upward flick. It was a forensic autopsy of her lie. "You idiot!" The shout came from my father. Mark jumped up, his face purple with rage. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at Evelyn. He was glaring at Lauren with pure, unadulterated fury. "I told you to use the old scanner," Mark roared. "I told you to scan her old signature from the student loan forms and Photoshop it onto the deed. Why did you try to freehand it, you stupid, arrogant girl?" The silence that followed was louder than the shout. Mark froze. He realized what he had just said. He realized he hadn't just called his daughter stupid. He had just admitted to being the architect of the forgery. He hadn't been angry that she did it. He was angry that she did it badly. Lauren stared at him, her eyes wide. "You told me to handle it. You said, 'Fix it, Lauren. I don't care how.' So I fixed it." "I didn't say get caught," Mark snarled. "So you were all in on it," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their bickering. "Dad, you knew. You weren't just protecting the family assets. You were coaching her on how to commit felonies." Mark slumped back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. The fight had gone out of him. The respected lawyer mask was gone, leaving only a small, greedy man. My mother, Denise, suddenly burst into tears. It was a theatrical, wailing sound. She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled it back as if she were made of fire. "Hannah, please," Denise sobbed. "You have to understand. We did it for you. We did it for the family. You were spiraling. You were so fragile 3 years ago. If we had given you that house, the pressure would have destroyed you." "Pressure?" I asked. "The taxes, the maintenance, the responsibility," Denise cried, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "You were barely making ends meet. We took the burden away so you could focus on getting better. We were trying to save you from stress." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had raised me. And for the first time, I saw the mechanism of her manipulation clearly. She wasn't protecting me from stress. She was the source of it. "Mom," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I was stressed because I had no money. And I had no money because you were stealing my loan payments. I was fragile because every time I tried to stand up, you kicked my legs out from under me." I stood up and walked over to the projection on the wall. Standing next to the image of the forged signature, "You talk about pressure," I said. "Do you know what pressure is? Pressure is choosing between buying gas to get to an interview or buying dinner. Pressure is waking up every day wondering why I am the only person in the world who can't seem to get a break, not knowing that my own parents are the ones cutting my brake lines." "We loved you," Denise wailed. "We just wanted everyone to be happy." "No," I said. "You wanted Lauren to be rich, and you wanted me to be quiet. That is not love. That is resource management." Evelyn cleared her throat. She hadn't looked at the projection. She had been watching Mark the entire time. "There is one detail we are missing," Evelyn said. "Nolan mentioned the date, August 14th. That is significant." She turned her gaze to me. "Hannah, do you know why I decided to come home?" she asked. "Because you finished your work in Cambodia?" I guessed. No, Evelyn said. My work is never finished. I came home because I received an email, an anonymous email, actually. But unlike your father, I know how to trace an IP address. She looked at Mark. He was still hiding his face in his hands. I came home, Evelyn continued, because I got an alert from the county clerk's office. Someone had inquired about the process of selling the Silverwater cottage. Someone wanted to know if a sale could be pushed through quickly, without a title search. Lauren gasped. I didn't. It wasn't you, Lauren, Evelyn said. It was Mark. Mark looked up, his eyes bloodshot. You were going to sell it, Evelyn said. You weren't just content with stealing the rent. You were going to liquidate the asset entirely. You needed a massive injection of cash to cover a malpractice lawsuit that is about to hit your firm, didn't you? Twist. The malpractice suit. How do you know about that? Mark whispered. I know everything. Mark, Evelyn said. I know you settled a case last month for negligence. I know your insurance premiums have tripled. And I know you are broke. That is why you needed to sell Hannah's house. But you couldn't sell it without a clear deed. And you couldn't get a clear deed because the original trust documents were locked in my safe deposit box. She pointed at the forged document on the table. That is why you forged this, Evelyn said. You weren't just covering up the past 3 years. You were preparing to sell the house out from under Hannah and the Quinns before I got back. You printed that deed in August because you were racing against the clock. You were racing against me. I looked at my father. He wasn't just a thief. He was desperate. He had been planning to sell the one thing I owned, pocket the millions, and leave me with nothing but a fake story about how the market crashed or taxes took it all. You were going to sell it, I said, feeling a cold numbness spread through my body. You were going to sell my house and leave me with nothing. I would have given you some, Mark pleaded. I would have given you $10,000, maybe 20. That is more money than you have ever seen. $20,000, I repeated, for a $2 million property. It was better than nothing, Mark shouted. You should be grateful I was going to give you anything. I am your father. I gave you life. And then you spent 28 years trying to take it back, I said. Nolan stepped forward and turned off the projector. The room seemed darker without the harsh light of the evidence. The forensic report on the document is conclusive, Nolan said. The digital footprint of the rent theft is conclusive. The admission of the forgery is recorded. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the discovery phase. He looked at Evelyn. Shall we move to the sentencing? Evelyn nodded slowly. She picked up the forged deed with her fingertips, looked at it with disgust, and then ripped it in half. Sentencing sounds appropriate, she said. But first, I think Hannah has something to say. She looked at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in front of my family. I didn't feel like the poor relation, the failure, the mistake. I looked at the gravy on the table, the ripped paper, the terrified faces of the people who had claimed to love me. I realized I didn't hate them. Hate takes energy. I just wanted them gone. I don't want to say anything to them, I said to Evelyn. I just want them out of my house. This is our house, Denise shrieked, looking around the dining room. This is the family estate. Not this house, I said, pointing to the floor. I mean my house, the one on the lake, the one you stole. I turned to Lauren. You have 24 hours to get your in-laws out. If they are not gone by tomorrow night, I am calling the police to have them removed for trespassing. And Lauren, make sure you clean the toilets before you leave. I want it spotless. Lauren opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. She just stared at me, seeing a stranger where her sister used to be. And as for the rest of you, Evelyn said, standing up, Hannah is right. We are done talking. The real conversation happens tomorrow, in court. I watched my father slump in his chair, defeated by the shredded remains of the forged deed. I watched my sister try to wipe the gravy from her dress, her hands trembling with the shock of being exposed. I watched my mother look around the room, her eyes darting like a trapped animal, realizing her performance of the concerned parent had failed. They looked terrified. They looked like people who had been struck by lightning out of a clear blue sky. And that was exactly how we planned it. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cool liquid soothed my throat, which had been tight with suppressed adrenaline for hours. I set the glass down with a soft click. "You know," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the heavy silence. "The funniest part about all of this is that you actually thought you surprised me." Mark looked up, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "What?" "The look on my face when Grandma asked about the strangers in the house," I said. "You thought it was shock. You thought I was genuinely confused. You thought I was reacting in real time." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, mirroring the posture Evelyn had held all night. "I wasn't confused. I was acting." Denise froze. "Acting?" "Grandma didn't just stumble upon the truth yesterday," I revealed. "She called me 7 days ago." The color drained from Lauren's face completely. You talked to her?" "She couldn't reach me through you," I explained. "And she knew if she called the house line, Mom would intercept it. So she called Cousin Sarah in Ohio. The one person in this family you people ignored because she married a mechanic and fell out of your tax bracket. Sarah called me. She passed the phone to Grandma." I looked at Evelyn. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. "Grandma had been suspicious for months," I continued. "She sent me letters asking about the house, asking why I never thanked her, asking why I never sent photos. I never got those letters. Did I, Mom?" Denise looked away. When she didn't hear back, she didn't assume I was ungrateful. I said, "She assumed something was wrong, so she started an audit, remotely, from Cambodia. She saw the deed transfer. She saw the lack of tax filings in my name. She put the pieces together before she even boarded the plane." "So you knew," Mark whispered. "You knew tonight was a setup." "I knew everything," I said. "When I walked in that door tonight, I knew about the house. I knew about the rent money. I knew about the forgery. I just didn't know the extent of the cruelty until I heard you try to justify it." "Why?" Mark asked, his voice cracking. "Why go through this charade? Why let us humiliate ourselves?" "Because we needed you to speak," I said. "If Grandma had just confronted you with a lawsuit, you would have lawyered up. You would have destroyed evidence. You would have deleted the emails, burned the fake deed, and coached Paul and Marissa on a cover story. We needed you relaxed. We needed you arrogant. We needed you to think you were in control so you would get sloppy." "Thanksgiving?" Evelyn interjected, her voice dry. "The perfect trap? The courts are closed. The banks are closed. Your partners are on vacation. You are trapped in this house with no way to move assets and no way to spin a narrative. You are sitting ducks." Mark realized the implication immediately. He looked at the pile of documents on the table, the bank statements, the emails, the projection of the text messages. He realized that his entire defense had been dismantled before he even knew he was on trial. Panic, raw and animalistic, took over. Mark lunged. It happened fast. He threw himself across the table, his arms sweeping out to grab the folder of documents and the tablet Nolan was holding. He wasn't thinking. He was reacting. He wanted to destroy the proof. "Give me that," Mark roared. He managed to grab the edge of the file folder, scattering papers onto the floor. He snatched the tablet from Nolan's hand, his fingers digging into the screen. "Delete it," Mark screamed, fumbling with the device. "How do you delete this?" Nolan didn't move. He didn't fight back. He didn't even flinch. He just watched my father with a look of profound pity. "Mark," Nolan said softly, "it is the cloud." Mark froze, his finger hovering over the screen. "The data isn't on the device," Nolan explained calmly. "It was uploaded to a secure server in Geneva 10 minutes ago. It was also mirrored to the district attorney's secure Dropbox and my partner's inbox in New York. You can smash the tablet if you like. It is insured, but you cannot smash the evidence." Mark stared at the tablet, The futility of his action washed over him. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a fool. He slowly lowered the device, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He sank back into his chair. A broken man. "You set us up," Mark whispered. "You set up your own family. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was a resource to be harvested instead of a person to be loved," I said. The silence that followed was broken by a sound I never expected to hear. "And it was their idea!" Lauren screamed it. She stood up, backing away from the table, pointing a shaking finger at our parents. "I didn't want to do it," Lauren yelled, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I told them it was risky. I told them you would find out eventually. But they said it was fine. Mom said Hannah is too stupid to notice. Dad said he handled the legal side. I just did what they told me." "Lauren," Denise gasped. "How dare you?" "It is true," Lauren shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Why should I go to jail? I just collected the rent. Dad forged the deed. Mom intercepted the mail. I am the victim here. They pressured me." "We pressured you?" Denise stood up, her face twisted with rage. "We pressured you? You begged for that money. Lauren, you needed the down payment for the Range Rover. You needed the club membership because you said Ethan's friends looked down on you. You spent that money faster than we could steal it." "You are the mother," Lauren yelled back. "You are supposed to tell me no. You are supposed to have morals. You dragged me into this." "You spoiled brat," Denise screamed. And then it happened. Denise lunged forward and slapped Lauren across the face. The sound was sickeningly loud, a sharp, wet crack that echoed off the high ceilings of the dining room. Lauren's head snapped to the side. She stumbled back, clutching her cheek, staring at our mother in shock. The room went dead silent. I watched them. I watched the people who had stood in Christmas photos wearing matching sweaters, smiling like the perfect American family. I watched them tear each other apart. It took exactly 5 seconds. 5 seconds of pressure, 5 seconds of threatening their money, and the facade of family loyalty dissolved into violence and betrayal. They didn't love each other. They were just co-conspirators who turned on each other the moment the getaway car broke down. "Look at you," Evelyn said. She didn't sound angry anymore. She sounded disgusted. A pack of wolves eating its own. Lauren was sobbing now. Deep, gasping heaves. Ethan was standing in the corner, typing furiously on his phone, probably texting his own lawyer, or perhaps his parents, telling them to run. "We are done," I said. "But before I kick you out of my house, and yes, technically, since Grandma owns the mortgage on this house too, I can kick you out. There is one last thing." I reached into my own bag. I hadn't brought a briefcase like Nolan. I just had a simple manila envelope. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. "We talked about the house," I said. "We talked about the credit score, but we haven't talked about Northbridge." The name landed like a bomb. Mark's head snapped up. Even Denise stopped glaring at Lauren. "Northbridge Advisory Group," I said, savoring the name. "The top boutique design consultancy in the state. 3 months ago, I got a call, a headhunter. They had seen my freelance work online. They loved it. They invited me for an interview." I looked at Mark. "You remember that week? Don't you, Dad? I was so excited. I actually told you about it. I made the mistake of trusting you one last time." I don't know what you're talking about." Mark stammered, but his eyes were darting around the room again. "The interview went perfectly," I said. "The creative director, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, told me in the room that I was the best candidate they had seen. She practically offered me the job on the spot. Starting salary was $85,000, benefits, a signing bonus. It was my way out." I paused, letting the number sink in. $85,000. It would have changed my life. It would have freed me. "And then," I continued, 2 days later, I got the rejection email. No explanation. Just a standard, "We have decided to go in another direction." I was devastated. I thought I had failed again. I slid the paper across the table toward my father. But when Evelyn started digging last week, she found something interesting in your phone records. Mark. Mark looked at the paper. It was a call log. On the morning of September 12th, at 9:30 a.m., I said, pointing to the highlighted line. A call was placed from your cell phone to the private line of Sarah Jenkins at Northbridge Advisory. The call lasted 12 minutes. I was just calling to put in a good word for you. Mark lied. The desperation in his voice was pathetic. Nolan contacted Mrs. Jenkins yesterday, I said. She was very confused. She remembered the call vividly. She said a man identifying himself as my legal counsel and former employer called to warn her. I looked my father in the eye. You told her I was currently under investigation for intellectual property theft, I said. You told her my portfolio was plagiarized. You told her hiring me would bring a lawsuit to her doorstep. I had to stop you, Mark shouted, slamming his fist on the table. If you got that job, you would have had a background check, a deep one. They represent high net worth clients. They would have scrutinized your assets. They would have found the deed to the lake house. They would have asked questions we couldn't answer. So you nuked my life, I said. You didn't just steal my past. You actively murdered my future. You kept me in poverty to cover your own tracks. We were going to give you an allowance, Denise cried, holding a napkin to her mouth. Once the house was sold, we were going to set up a monthly allowance. You wouldn't have needed to work. An allowance, I repeated, tasting the bile in my mouth. Like a child, like a pet. I stood up. I was done sitting at this table. I was done looking at the congealing turkey and the spilled wine and the shattered family. That job, I said, was my dream, and you killed it, not because I wasn't good enough, but because my success was a threat to your theft. I looked at Nolan. Add it to the civil suit, I said. Tortious interference with a business contract, defamation of character, and loss of future earnings. I want them to pay for every single dollar of that salary I never got. Noted, Nolan said, typing on a new tablet he had pulled from his bag. And one more thing, I said, turning back to face them. My voice was no longer loud. It was deadly quiet. I called Sarah Jenkins myself this morning. I explained the situation. I sent her the affidavit Nolan prepared. Do you know what she said? I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had smiled in years. And she said the position is still open. Mark looked at me with hatred. Pure, unadulterated hatred. He realized that despite everything he had done, the lies, the theft, the sabotage, he had failed. I was still standing. You are ungrateful, Mark spat, after everything we provided. You provided nothing but a cage, I said. And tonight, I just walked out of it. I turned to Evelyn. I'm ready for the police now, I said. Evelyn nodded and pulled her phone from her pocket. She didn't dial. She just pressed send on a text message she had already drafted. They are parked at the end of the driveway, Evelyn said. They were just waiting for the signal. The color drained from Mark's face for the final time. The reality of the flashing lights was no longer a threat. It was an arrival. Wait, my father said. The word came out as a desperate rasp, a sound of a man who saw the guillotine blade descending and was trying to talk the executioner out of releasing the rope. The blue lights of the police cruisers were not yet visible through the heavy curtains, but we all knew they were there, silent and waiting at the end of the long driveway. The threat of imminent arrest had a way of sobering up a drunk, or in this case, stripping the arrogance off a narcissist. Mark wiped his face with a trembling hand. He looked at Evelyn, then at Nolan, and finally, with a look of pained necessity, at me. We do not need to do this, Mark said, his voice taking on a frantic, pleading speed. Police? Criminal records? That destroys everything. Hannah, it destroys the firm. It destroys the family name. Think about the scandal. Think about the newspapers. He stood up and leaned over the table, ignoring the scattered papers and the mess Lauren had made. We can settle this, Mark said. Civilly, privately, I can liquidate some assets. I have a retirement account. Denise has jewelry. We can put together a package. Restitution. We will pay you back the rent money, all of it, plus interest, and a sum for the trouble with the job hunt." He forced a smile. It was a ghastly thing, stretching tight over his pale skin. "Compensatory damages," Mark said, using the legal term like a shield. "We will make you whole. Hannah, a lump sum payment. Tonight, we write a contract, we sign it, and you walk away with $250,000, maybe more. And we forget the police. We forget the fraud charges. We just move on." I stared at him. $250,000. 3 years ago, that amount of money would have sounded like a fantasy. It would have been a lifeline. But standing there now, listening to him try to haggle over the price of my soul, I felt nothing but a cold, hard rage. "You want to write a check?" I asked. "Yes," Mark nodded eagerly. "A check. A big one. Start fresh." "Can you write a check for 3 years?" I asked. Mark blinked. "What?" "Can you write a check that gives me back the 3 years I spent thinking I was insane?" I asked, my voice rising. "Can you write a check that erases the nights I cried myself to sleep because I thought I was too stupid to manage my own life? Can you buy back the moment I read that rejection letter from Northbridge and felt my heart break? Can you put a price tag on the fact that I have no friends because I was too ashamed to go out, too broke to socialize, while you were throwing parties at the country club on my dime?" "We are trying to apologize," Denise interjected, her voice shrill with panic. "We are trying to fix it." "You are not trying to fix it," I said. "You are trying to buy my silence. You are calling 3 years of systematic abuse a transactional error that you can settle out of court." I looked at Evelyn. She was watching the exchange with eyes like flint. "They think it is about the money," I said to her. "They still think this is a negotiation." "It is not a negotiation," Evelyn said. "It is a foreclosure." She turned to Nolan Price. "Nolan, bring out the binder, the black one." Nolan reached into his bag again. This time, he didn't pull out a tablet or a loose document. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder with the Harrow family crest embossed on the front. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud that rattled the silverware. "The last will and testament of Evelyn Harrow," Nolan announced. "Updated and notarized yesterday afternoon." The room went silent. The air seemed to leave the room. For people like my parents and my sister, money was oxygen, and the Harrow inheritance was the atmosphere they lived in. "Mark," Evelyn said, her voice conversational, "you have spent the last 20 years waiting for me to die. Do not deny it. You married my daughter. You tolerated my lectures. And you managed my affairs because you knew that one day the heart failure would finally win, and you would be the executor of an estate worth $40 million. Mark didn't speak. He couldn't. He was staring at the black binder as if it were a bomb. "And you, Lauren," Evelyn continued, turning to my sister, "you preened and posed. You played the perfect granddaughter. You married a man from a good family to secure your position. You counted on that inheritance to fund the lifestyle you clearly cannot afford on your own." Evelyn gestured to Nolan. "Read the amendment, Clause 4. Nolan opened the binder. He didn't need to hunt for the page. It was marked with a red tab. "I, Evelyn Harrow, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all prior bequests to the following individuals." Nolan read. His voice was devoid of pity. "Mark Blake, Denise Blake, Lauren Pierce, and Ethan Pierce." Ethan's head snapped up. "Me? I didn't do anything. I just married into this." "You signed the checks, Ethan," Nolan said without looking up. "You are named as a co-conspirator in the fraud investigation. Therefore, you are removed." Nolan continued reading from the document. "All assets, real estate, cash holdings, stocks, and bonds previously designated for the aforementioned parties are hereby transferred to the sole beneficiary of the Harrow estate, Hannah Marie Blake." "No!" Denise whispered. Her knees gave out, and she slumped back into her chair. "Mom, you can't. That is everything. The house we live in, the trust fund, The firm's backing. You can't cut us off. We are your children." "You are thieves," Evelyn said, "and I do not leave my legacy to thieves." She looked at Mark. "The house you are sitting in right now?" Evelyn asked. "It is in my name. The firm's building? In my name. The cars in the driveway? Leased under the family trust. Effective immediately. The funding for all of it is cut. You are not just disinherited. Mark, you are evicted. You are destitute." The impact of the words hit them like a physical blow. The fraud charges meant jail. Yes, but jail with money was manageable. Jail with high-priced lawyers and a soft landing was survivable. But this was total annihilation. This was poverty. This was becoming what they hated most. Me. And then, the breaking point came. They didn't scream. They didn't fight. They collapsed. "Mom, please," Denise began to sob. Loud, ugly, heaving sobs. She threw herself toward Evelyn, reaching for her mother's hand. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. We lost our way. We were desperate. Don't do this to us. We are family. Blood is thicker than water." "Please, Evelyn," Mark begged, tears streaming down his face, stripping away the last of his dignity. "I made a mistake. I was weak. I will fix it. I will work for free. I will do anything. Just don't take the legacy. Don't leave us with nothing." Even Lauren, who had been defiant only minutes ago, looked at Ethan, saw the terror in his eyes, the realization that he was about to divorce a penniless fraudster, and broke down. "Grandma, I'm sorry," Lauren cried. "I was stupid. I listened to Dad. I didn't want to hurt Hannah. I love Hannah. She is my sister." It was a performance, a grotesque, desperate variety show of regret. They were crying. Yes, but they weren't crying for me. They weren't crying because they realized they had hurt a human being. They were crying because the bank vault had just slammed shut on their fingers. Evelyn watched them for a moment, her face unreadable. Then, she raised her hand. The silence was instant. "You are apologizing to the wrong person," Evelyn said. She pointed a finger at me. "I am old," Evelyn said. "I have made my peace with the fact that I raised a viper. But Hannah? Hannah is the one you tried to bury. If you want any hope, any sliver of hope that I might reconsider leaving you enough money to buy a tent to sleep in, you will convince her." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Beg her," Evelyn commanded. The room turned to me. 3 pairs of eyes. My father, my mother, my sister, the people who were supposed to be my protectors, the people who had turned me into their prey. Mark hesitated. His pride was a stubborn thing, but Denise was faster. "Hannah," my mother choked out. She stood up and walked toward me. She looked old suddenly. The makeup could not hide the fear. "Baby, honey, please, you know we love you. You know we didn't mean for it to go this far. Tell Grandma. Tell her we are a family. Tell her not to destroy us." I can't go to prison, Hannah." Mark stammered, his voice trembling. "I am 55 years old. I won't survive it. And without the estate, we have nothing. We will be on the street. Is that what you want? To see your parents on the street?" And then Lauren moved. My sister, the queen of Cedar Hollow, the girl who had sneered at my thrift store shoes an hour ago, dropped to her knees. She crawled the 2 feet between us. She reached out and grabbed my hands. Her palms were cold and clammy. She squeezed my fingers tight, looking up at me with wide, wet eyes. "Sissy," Lauren whispered. She used the name she hadn't used since we were 10. Since before she became popular and I became invisible. "Sissy, please," Lauren begged. "I am scared. Ethan is going to leave me. I know he is. If I lose the money, and I go to jail, my life is over. I am sorry about the house. You can have it. You can have the rent money. I will pay it back. I swear. Just tell Grandma to stop. Tell the lawyer to put the will away. Please, do it for me." She pressed her forehead against my hand, weeping. I looked down at her. I felt the wetness of her tears on my skin. For a second, A conditioned reflex kicked in. The part of me that had been trained to be the peacekeeper, the doormat, wanted to pull her up, wanted to say, "It is okay. Don't cry. We will figure it out." It was a muscle memory of submission. But then I looked at her neck. I saw the diamond necklace she was wearing. It was new. I looked at Mark, watching me with bated breath, calculating the odds of my mercy. I looked at Denise, her eyes darting to the will on the table, not at my face. And the realization hit me with the clarity of a diamond. They weren't sorry. If I saved them right now, if I told Evelyn to back down, if I told Nolan to send the police away, they wouldn't be grateful. They would be relieved. And the moment the danger passed, the moment they felt safe again, the resentment would start. They would hate me for having this power over them. They would hate me for seeing them beg. And within 6 months, they would be plotting again. They would find a way to punish me for this humiliation. This wasn't love. This was a hostage negotiation. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the gun. I didn't pull my hand away from Lauren, not because I was comforted by her touch, but because I wanted to feel the vibration of her fear. I wanted to remember exactly what it felt like to have the golden child trembling at my feet. I took a deep breath. The air in the room tasted different. It didn't smell like turkey or expensive perfume anymore. It smelled like leverage. I looked at Evelyn. She was waiting. She wasn't telling me what to do. She was giving me the choice. She had handed me the knife, but she was letting me decide where to cut. I looked back down at Lauren. "You are right," I said softly. Lauren looked up, hope flooding her face. "I am?" "Yes," I said. "You are scared, and you should be." The hope vanished, replaced by a fresh wave of terror. "But we are family," Mark cried out. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means everything," I said. "It means you knew exactly where to stick the knife to cause the most damage. Strangers couldn't have hurt me like this. Dad, only family can do this." I slowly pulled my hands out of Lauren's grip. She tried to hold on, but I was stronger. I stood up, wiping her tears off my hands with a napkin. "You want me to save you," I said to the room. "You want me to make the bad men with the badges go away. You want me to tell Grandma to give you back the money." "Yes," Denise whispered. "Yes, Hannah, please." I paused. I let the silence stretch. I let them dangle over the abyss. "I can do that," I lied. It was a beautiful lie. It was the same kind of lie they had fed me for 3 years. "We are helping you. We are protecting you." "But," I added, my voice hardening into steel, "if I am going to be the head of this family, if I am going to be the one with the checkbook and the power, then things are going to change, drastically." I looked at Nolan. "What is the maximum sentence for fraud and grand larceny in this state?" I asked. "For the amount stolen," Nolan replied instantly, 15 to 20 years, per count." I looked back at my parents. 15 years, I repeated. "That is a long time. You wouldn't survive it. Mark, you are right about that." Mark nodded frantically. I wouldn't. "So here's the situation," I said. "You are terrified of prison, and you are terrified of poverty, and right now, I am the only thing standing between you and both of those things." I sat back down, picking up my wine glass. I swirled the red liquid, watching the vortex. "It feels terrible, doesn't it?" I asked. "To be completely helpless, to have your entire future depend on the whim of someone who has every reason to destroy you." I took a sip of wine. "Welcome to my world." I placed the glass down and looked them dead in the eye. "Nolan," I said, "don't send the police away yet. Tell them to wait. I have a few conditions before I decide if I want to press charges." I saw the flicker of hope in their eyes again. They thought they had hooked me. They thought I was negotiating. They thought I was weak enough to settle. But they were wrong. I wasn't negotiating a surrender. I was negotiating the terms of their execution. "Conditions?" Mark asked, his voice wavering with a desperate sort of hope. He sat up straighter, wiping the tears from his cheeks, trying to reassemble the fragments of his dignity. "We can meet conditions. We can negotiate terms. Stop using that word, I said coldly. You are not in a position to negotiate. You are in a position to surrender. I nodded to Nolan. He opened a new folder on his tablet, and the projector on the wall hummed to life again. This time, there were no photos or emails, just a spreadsheet. A long, detailed, terrifying spreadsheet. This, Nolan announced, is the restitution schedule. He scrolled to the top item. First, Nolan said, we have the unauthorized rental income. As previously established, the sum is $172,800. However, since this money was obtained through fraudulent means, we are applying the standard statutory interest rate for civil theft, compounded monthly. That brings the total for this line item to $195,400. Lauren gasped. I don't have that kind of money. I spent it. We know, I said. We saw your closet, but we will get to how you will pay in a moment. Nolan continued. Second, the Northbridge Advisory Group contract. Hannah's starting salary was to be $85,000 per year. By sabotaging that employment, you caused her a direct financial loss. We are calculating 2 years of lost wages, plus the loss of benefits and the signing bonus. That comes to $182,000. Mark turned pale. You can't claim future wages. You didn't work there. I didn't work there because you committed tortious interference, I countered. You called my potential employer and lied to them. In civil court. Mark, that makes you liable for the damage, and the damage is my salary. Third, Nolan went on, ignoring Mark's protest. Credit repair and punitive damages for financial abuse. You intentionally suppressed Hannah's credit score to keep her dependent. We are valuing the damage to her financial reputation and the hardship caused, the high interest rates she was forced to pay on her car, the denial of housing, at $50,000. Nolan tapped the screen, and a final number appeared at the bottom in bold red text. Total immediate restitution. Nolan read, $427,400. The room went silent. It was a staggering sum. For a family that was currently leveraging debt to maintain appearances, it was a death sentence. That is impossible, Mark whispered. We don't have liquid cash like that. The accounts are drained. You know that. We are trying to sell the house to cover the firm's debts. I don't want cash, I said, leaning forward. I know you don't have it. I want assets. What assets? Denise cried. We have nothing left. You have a lot, I corrected. You just don't want to part with it. I started counting on my fingers. The vintage Mercedes in the garage, I listed. Market value is roughly $60,000. The diamond necklace Lauren is wearing right now, I recall you bragging it was insured for $15,000. Mom's Cartier watch, $8,000. I looked at Mark. And then there is the equity in this house, I said. Grandma owns the mortgage, yes, but you have paid down some of the principal over the last 20 years. There is about $200,000 of equity in the deed. You are going to sign that over to me. You want us to sign over the equity? Mark looked horrified. That is our retirement. That is all we have. No, I said. That is what you had before you decided to steal from me. And the rest? I looked at Lauren. Lauren, you and Ethan own a condo in the city, don't you? An investment property? Ethan froze. You leave that out of this. That is in my name. Actually, Nolan interrupted, sliding a piece of paper across the table toward Ethan. It is legally considered a marital asset, and since you are a co-conspirator, it is fair game. I am not a co-conspirator, Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I told you. I just married into this crazy family. I didn't sign the lease. I didn't forge the deed. I was just a bystander. Is that so? Nolan asked. He pulled another document from his stack. This is a notarized affidavit regarding the occupancy of the Silverwater cottage, Nolan said. It was required by the Homeowners Association to prove that the new tenants were related to the owner. It is signed by Lauren Pierce and Ethan Pierce. Ethan stared at the paper. You vouched for them, Nolan said. You signed a legal document stating that Paul and Marissa Quinn were lawful residents under a family arrangement, knowing full well the owner, Hannah, was unaware of their presence. That makes you a party to the fraud. You facilitated the concealment. Ethan slumped back in his chair, his face gray. He looked at Lauren with pure loathing. "You told me it was just a formality," Ethan hissed at his wife. "You told me Hannah didn't care." "I thought she didn't," Lauren cried. "And speaking of Paul and Marissa," Nolan said, "we will need them to come in for a deposition tomorrow morning." "No," Lauren begged. "Please, don't drag them into this." "They are already in it," I said. "They were paying rent to a shell company. They signed a lease with a confidentiality clause. They are not innocent. Lauren, they are fences for stolen goods, and they will answer for it." "They will have to testify," Nolan explained calmly. "They will have to explain under oath why they agreed to hide their tenancy from the registered owner. They will have to explain where they thought that $4,800 a month was going. If they lie, they commit perjury. If they tell the truth, they implicate you and your parents. Either way, their retirement is going to be very stressful." "They are old," Lauren sobbed. "This will kill them." "Then you should not have involved them in your crime," Evelyn said from the head of the table. Her voice was final. Denise tried one last, desperate pivot. She wiped her eyes and looked at Nolan with a trembling chin. "But the student loans," she quavered. "That really was a mistake. I am not good with computers. The auto-transfer settings are confusing. Surely you can't count that as malice. It was just incompetence." Nolan didn't even look up. "Mrs. Blake, I have the audit logs from the bank." "Logs?" Denise blinked. "Every time you change a recurring transfer, the system logs the user activity," Nolan said. "On 3 separate occasions, once in 2023 and twice in 2024, you logged in, canceled the transfer to the loan servicer, and manually redirected the funds to your vacation account, and each time, you added a memo note." He tapped the tablet, projecting a new image. It was a screenshot of a bank memo field. "Memo H's loan money, spa weekend." The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't just theft, it was mockery. She had labeled the stolen money. She had written it down. "You labeled it," I whispered. "You stole the money I sent you to pay my debts, and you labeled it spa weekend." Denise shrank into her chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. There was no defense for this. There was no system error. It was pure, documented greed. "Here is the deal," I said, my voice hard and flat. Nolan placed a heavy document in the center of the table. It was thick, bound with a staple. "This is a confession of judgment and a restitution agreement," I explained. "It details everything we just discussed. It grants me the equity in this house. It signs over the vintage Mercedes and the jewelry. It liquidates Lauren's investment account. It garnishes Mark's wages from the firm for the next 10 years to pay off the balance." I looked at them. "If you sign this right now," I said, "we do not file the criminal complaint. We keep the police waiting at the end of the driveway. You lose your money, you lose your status, but you stay out of prison. You get to keep your freedom." "And if we don't?" Mark asked, his voice barely audible. "If you don't," I said, "Nolan walks out that door and hands the flash drive to the officers. You will be arrested tonight. You will be arraigned tomorrow, and with the amount of evidence we have, you will be looking at a minimum of 10 years behind bars." Mark looked at the document. He picked up a pen, his hand shaking violently. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "But," Mark hesitated, "how do we know? How do we know you won't go to the police anyway? How do we know you won't take the assets and then jail us later?" "You don't," I said. "You have to trust me." I smiled coldly, just like I trusted you. "There is one more thing," Mark said, trying to find a loophole, a way to wiggle out. "The mail. You said you have proof I intercepted your letters, but you can't prove that. Mail gets lost all the time. That is federal jurisdiction. You would need a witness to prove I tampered with it. Without a witness, that charge won't stick." He was grasping at straws, trying to reduce the leverage. He thought if he could knock out the mail tampering charge, he might have room to negotiate. "A witness," Evelyn repeated. She turned her chair slightly toward the hallway door. "That is a valid point. Mark, a witness would be crucial." She raised her voice slightly. "You can come in now." The door from the kitchen swung open. A woman walked in. She was wearing a heavy coat and clutching a purse to her chest. She looked terrified. Her face was pale, and she refused to look at Mark. Mark dropped his pen. "Linda?" he whispered. It was Linda, his executive assistant of 15 years, the woman who organized his calendar, bought his anniversary gifts for Denise, and handled his private correspondence. She was the most loyal employee he had. "I am sorry, Mr. Blake," Linda said, her voice shaking. I couldn't do it anymore." "What are you doing here?" Mark demanded, standing up. "Did they pay you? Did they bribe you?" "They offered me immunity," Linda said quietly. "Immunity?" Mark looked confused. "I have been keeping a log," Linda said, staring at her shoes. "For 3 years, every time you handed me a letter from Mrs. Harrow addressed to Hannah, every time you told me to shred it or burn it, I didn't destroy it immediately. I made a copy." Mark looked like he had been shot. "And the job offers," Linda continued, tears welling in her eyes. "The letters from the design firms? You made me call them. You made me pretend to be a reference. You made me type those emails from the anonymous account. I have the drafts. Mr. Blake, I saved them all on a hard drive at home, because I knew one day you would try to blame me." You traitor!" Mark screamed. He lunged toward her, but Nolan stepped in between them, his presence solid and threatening. "Sit down, Mark," Nolan ordered. "She is lying," Mark yelled. "She is a disgruntled employee." "She is a witness with 3 years of documentation," Evelyn corrected. "And she has already given a sworn statement to Nolan. She is not going to jail, Mark, but her testimony guarantees that you will." The fight went out of Mark completely. He looked at Linda, who was weeping softly in the corner. He looked at the document on the table. He looked at the flashing blue lights reflecting off the window glass in the distance. He realized there were no more moves, no more lies, no more loopholes. The net had closed tight. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't just tense anymore. It was the heavy, crushing weight of finality. They weren't angry. They weren't bargaining. They were terrified. They realized that their lives, as they knew them, were over. "Sign it," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. "Sign it, or I tell the officers to come in." Mark picked up the pen again. He didn't look at Denise. He didn't look at Lauren. He looked at the paper that would strip him of everything he had spent his life hoarding. He signed. Denise was next. She cried as she wrote her name, her tears smudging the ink. Then Lauren. She signed with a jagged, angry scrawl, breaking the tip of the pen. Ethan signed last, silent and ghostly pale, knowing his marriage was likely over the moment the ink dried. I took the document. I checked the signatures. I handed it to Nolan, who placed it in his briefcase and locked it with a snap. "Thank you," I said. I stood up. "You have 30 days to vacate this property," I told my parents. "And Lauren, you have 24 hours to vacate mine." I looked at the food on the table, cold and untouched. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. I turned and walked toward the door, with Evelyn and Nolan right behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. A ruin, and for the first time in 3 years, the air outside tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. Nolan Price held his phone to his ear, his expression unreadable. The room was thick with the smell of cooling food and the sharper, metallic scent of fear. My family sat around the table, their signatures drying on the restitution agreement, looking like people who had just survived a plane crash only to realize they were stranded on a desert island. "Yes," Nolan said into the phone. "The civil documents are secured. However, regarding the criminal complaint, yes, the packet is ready. We are waiting for the client's final signal." He looked at me. "The signal. It was the button I held in my hand. The choice between stripping them of their assets and stripping them of their freedom. They had signed the money over, yes. But looking at them, Mark's resentful glare, Denise's tear-streaked self-pity, Lauren's petulant shivering, I realized something terrifying. They still didn't think they had done anything wrong. They thought they had just lost a game of poker. "Give me that phone!" Mark roared. It happened in a blur. My father, the man who cared more about his cufflinks than his children, launched himself out of his chair. He didn't look like a lawyer anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He lunged across the table, his hand clawing for Nolan's device, aiming to smash the connection to the outside world. He never made it. A wooden cane cracked sharply against the table, creating a barrier between Mark and the attorney. It wasn't a violent strike, but it was precise. Evelyn held the cane with a grip of iron, her arm fully extended. She didn't flinch. Mark froze, his chest heaving, his hand inches from the phone. "Sit down, Mark," Evelyn said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a judge's gavel. "You just attempted to destroy evidence and intimidate a witness in the presence of legal counsel. Congratulations. You just proved that your signature on that restitution agreement was in bad faith." Mark stared at the cane, then at his mother-in-law. He realized his mistake instantly. He sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. I panicked," Mark whispered. "I just wanted it to stop." "It doesn't stop," Lauren shouted. Her voice was high and brittle, cracking under the pressure. "It never stops because you won't tell the truth." She turned to me, her eyes wild. The facade of the perfect sister had completely disintegrated. "I am not going to jail for him," Lauren screamed, pointing at our father. "I am telling you everything, Hannah, everything. It wasn't just the house. It was the startup money, too." "Shut up, Lauren," Denise hissed, reaching out to grab her daughter's arm. "No!" Lauren yanked her arm away. "Hannah, remember when I started my jewelry business? The $20,000 Mom said was a small inheritance from a distant aunt? There was no aunt. That was your tuition refund. The university sent it back when you took a semester off, and they cashed the check." My jaw tightened. I remembered that refund. I had fought with the bursar's office for months, and they insisted they had mailed it. I thought it was lost. I spent 2 years paying off a loan for a semester I never attended, while Lauren used my money to launch a jewelry line that failed in 6 months. "And the car," Lauren continued, vomit spewing the secrets now. "The hit and run on Dad's Lexus 3 years ago? It wasn't a stranger. It was Ethan. He was drunk. Dad paid off the police chief to bury the report and used your identity to file the insurance claim so his premium wouldn't go up. That is why your insurance is $300 a month." "Lauren, stop it!" Mark yelled, his face turning a deep, dangerous red. "You are destroying this family." "You destroyed it," Lauren shrieked. "You told me Hannah was the sacrifice. That is what you called her. You said every family needs a worker bee to support the queens. You made me believe I was entitled to her money." "Because she is weak," Denise shouted, losing control completely. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "Look at her. She has no ambition. She has no drive. We took resources that were being wasted and put them to good use. We kept this family afloat while she was playing artist. We did what we had to do." They were screaming over each other now, Mark blaming Lauren's spending, Lauren blaming Mark's schemes, Denise blaming my lack of gratitude. It was a cacophony of ugliness. They were tearing each other apart, revealing crimes I hadn't even suspected: insurance fraud, tuition theft, identity theft. It was a masterclass in toxicity, and I sat there, silent, watching the people who shared my DNA turn into monsters. And then, a sound cut through the noise. Knock, knock, knock. It was a heavy, authoritative sound against the front oak door. It wasn't the frantic pounding of a neighbor. It was the rhythmic, inevitable knock of procedure. The screaming stopped instantly. Mark looked at the door. Denise put a hand to her mouth. Lauren started to shake violently. "Nolan, I said calmly. "Let them in." Nolan walked to the foyer. We heard the latch click, the heavy door swing open, and the sound of low professional voices. Two uniformed officers stepped into the dining room. They didn't have guns drawn. They didn't need to. Their presence alone filled the space with the cold reality of consequences. Behind them walked a man in a suit, a forensic accountant from the district attorney's office. "Mark Blake?" the officer asked. Mark couldn't speak. He just nodded. "We are here to serve a temporary restraining order on all assets held by the Blake Family Trust," the officer said, handing Mark a thick stack of papers, "and to secure the premises for a court-ordered financial audit. No one is to leave this property. No electronics are to be touched." "But we signed," Mark whispered, looking at me with betrayal in his eyes. "We signed the agreement. You said if we signed, you wouldn't call them." I stood up. I walked over to the table where the document lay, the confession they had signed minutes ago. "I said if you signed, I would accept the restitution," I said. "I didn't say I would stop the investigation." I reached into my bag and pulled out one final document. It was a single page, stamped with the official seal of the state court. "This," I said, holding it up, "is an emergency guardianship and asset freeze order. Evelyn and I had it signed by a judge 3 hours ago, before dinner even started." "What does that mean?" Denise asked, her voice trembling. "It means," I said, "that I am not just taking the house, Mom. I am taking control. As of this moment, I am the court-appointed conservator of the family estate. You cannot spend a dime without my permission. You cannot sell a car. You cannot transfer a dollar. I own the bank accounts. I own the credit cards. I own the firm's operating capital." I looked at Mark. "You tried to put me under a conservatorship," I said. "You tried to label me incompetent so you could control my money. It seems fitting that the court decided you were the ones who couldn't be trusted with finances." You trapped us," Mark rasped. "You planned this. You sat there and ate dinner knowing you had already taken everything." "I learned from the best," I said. I looked at them, really looked at them. The expensive clothes, the manicured hands, the terrified eyes. "For 3 years," I said, my voice steady and quiet, "I walked around believing I was broken. I thought I was poor because I wasn't smart enough. I thought I was poor because I didn't work hard enough. I thought I was a failure." I took a breath. "But I wasn't poor because I was incapable," I said. "I was poor because I was designed to be. You engineered my poverty. You built a machine to extract my life and pump it into yours." "We are your parents," Mark shouted, trying one last time to use the guilt card. "We gave you life. You cannot do this to your own blood. Family protects family." "Family?" I asked. I looked at the bruising on my credit score. I looked at the phantom memories of the job I never got. I looked at the years of hunger. "Family is a bond," I said. "It is not a shield, and it is certainly not an excuse to legalize sin." I picked up the pen one last time. I looked at the restitution agreement they had signed, the one that gave me back my house, my money, and my dignity, and then I looked at the police officer. "Officer," I said, "these individuals have confessed to grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. The evidence is on the table. The confessions are signed. I would like to file formal charges." "Hannah, no!" Lauren screamed, lunging for me, but the officer stepped in, blocking her path. "No!" Denise wailed, collapsing to the floor. "Take them into custody," I said. The room erupted into chaos, but it was a distant chaos. I watched as the officers read them their rights. I watched as Mark was handcuffed, his face a mask of shock. I watched as Lauren was led away, still weeping about her social standing. I watched as Ethan tried to explain he was just a bystander, only to be cuffed alongside them. They were led out the front door, into the flashing red and blue lights that cut through the darkness of the driveway. And then, the door closed. The silence rushed back in. It was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was clean. I stood alone in the dining room with Evelyn and Nolan. The table was a wreck. Spilled wine, gravy stains, scattered papers, the ruins of a dynasty. Evelyn stood up slowly. She adjusted her cardigan. She walked over to the sideboard and picked up the carving knife. She walked back to the table, to the place where I had been sitting. She pulled out my chair. "Sit," Evelyn said. I sat down. My legs felt weak, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Evelyn picked up the platter of turkey. It was cold now, but she didn't seem to care. She carved a thick slice of white meat and placed it on my plate. She added a scoop of stuffing. She poured a fresh glass of wine. She pushed the plate toward me. "Eat," Evelyn said softly. I looked at her. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling, a small, sad, proud smile. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you help me do it this way? You could have just sued them." "Because," Evelyn said, placing her hand over mine, "you needed to see them for what they were. You needed to kill the part of you that still wanted their approval." She gestured to the empty chairs where my monsters used to sit. "Eat, Hannah," she said. "From this moment on, your life does not belong to them anymore. It belongs to you." I picked up my fork. I took a bite. It was cold, and it was dry, and it was the best thing I had ever tasted. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a wild ride exposing the truth behind this family's betrayal. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below with your city or country, and let's chat about what you would have done in Hannah's shoes. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to see justice served. See you in the next one.